Hello everyone, welcome back to Fresh Perspective. With me today is André le Roux. André, thank you very much for joining Fresh Perspective to share your perspective with us.
Thank you, Francois. Thanks for having me. We've known each other for a long time, so it's a real honor to be on your podcast at last. We've known each other for, what is that? We've known each other for 20, 25 years. So
25 easily.
It's amazing to see, and I'm really enjoying the fresh perspective that you're bringing to people. So it's an honor to be here, to be honest.
Thank you. Well, I want to share your fresh perspective with the folks, the tens of people listening out there.
It'll be one for the archives, I'm sure.
Yeah. Listen, I want to kick off with a very simple question. One I ask all the guests is what is it that you do?
Okay, so I usually struggle to explain this to my father, so I need to think. I've been thinking about it for years now. So, in a nutshell, what I do is I am in strategic planning. So I help guys develop strategies or various types of strategies, or I help them develop develop strategic solutions for their businesses or where they are or where their businesses are. The best way I can explain what I do, because there's a few nuances to what I do. So it's strategy. That's sort of like the sandbox where I play, but it's where complexity and strategy and probability meets. So where those three things come together. So more often than not, the projects that I do there's a high degree of complexity and risk and uncertainty to it. There's a strategic outcome, and the focus that I bring to it, or the thing that I bring to it, is I try to increase the probability of a successful outcome. And then to do that, I've got various methodologies and best practice and good practice, and basically a broad spectrum of integrated knowledge and expertise that I bring to the table. And then using those methodologies and processes that I developed over the years, you can then increase the probability of a successful outcome. So in a nutshell, that's what I do. And then you can break that up into sort of like 6 components. So there's strategy engineering or strategy planning, which is basically, how more effectively can I get from A to B or where I need to be? And then there are a few peripheral services that becomes very important in strategy development, specifically when it starts becoming more complex. So it's things like complex decision-making. It's interesting, as human beings, we go to university or we learn, but we never learn how to make decisions, specifically not complex decisions. So it's an interesting field. So it's a lot of complex decision-making that I do. And then a big part of that is also stress testing or red teaming. It's where my company gets its name from. So red teaming is a critical thinking, contrarian thinking process that you can use to stress test ideas, concepts, and so forth. So it's a lovely process that you can stress test your strategy, your thinking, your idea, and your concept. And then with that, there is scenario planning, and there is behavior change, and then also things like belief systems and culture design. So it's within that gambit and that spectrum of strategy where I play. That's what I do.
That's a lot of stuff. I love it, and I want to delve into all of it. So you talked about decision making, and that we never get taught how to make decisions. We learn a lot of things and knowledge, but never how to make decisions. So talk to us about how do you develop better decision-making skills?
So decision-making, so first of all, decision-making has got what makes decision-making difficult for most of us, most of the time, is that there is a strong emotional component to decision-making. To be more correct, there's a strong subconscious component to decision-making. The subconscious starts playing a big role when you start making decisions, specifically complex decisions. So the fancy scientists or the really learned people will tell you the following statistic, and they'll say that when human beings are under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress, and there's a lot of uncertainty and complexity, your brain doesn't like that. So what you do is your brain, when it becomes too much for you, and all of us has got a ceiling, right? A level that we can manage. So when that happens over a long period of time, we start making emotional decisions, or what they say, system 1 kicks in. So your subconscious, your your quick processes in your brain starts kicking in, and then you start going down. A few things happen. Let's start with there. So you start going down rabbit holes. That's one thing. Because of all the uncertainty in your brain, you start creating future scenarios based on things that happened in the past or might have happened in the past, because that's what your brain does, right? It starts to create context. It needs to resolve this decision that you can't make it needs to resolve this problem, needs to resolve it. So basically, under long periods of stress, you start thinking about, okay, when did this happen to me previously in my life? Or, what if this happens? So all of those things then works together to make decision-making quite difficult. And more often than not, as human beings, we tend to make emotional decisions based on past experiences, based on these highly uncertain environments that we find ourselves in. I mean, take COVID-19 for argument's sake. I mean, everybody's under far more pressure than ever before. So what you see is a lot of not rational, but you see a lot of emotional decision-making taking place, or people just freezing. I don't know what to do. So decision-making actually starts there. It's about understanding the human condition. That's the most important thing. So the first step is understand that there is a human condition. And then if you understand that, then it's about building in processes, principles, protocols to help you make a better decision.
All right, before we go there, I want to talk about that unconscious emotional thing kicking in that you described. I understand that we all have that, right? When there's pressure, it triggers us in a way to think like, when did this happen before? When did I feel this way before? Mm-hmm. Or it reminds you of when you felt stressed before, or things like that. And are you saying that then causes you to make a more emotional decision? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's not always. I need to just say that not always, because not all people are the same, but just most of us. I mean, there's even a number. I think there is, if memory serves me right, it's either someone like Daniel Kahneman or it's Dan Ariely or someone like that. They've even put a number to it, or one of the big consulting firms. They've measured it. It's like up to 75% of something. It's a number like that. Up to 75% of those decisions then are emotional decisions.
Isn't it Dan Ariely that also said we make emotional decisions that we then rationally justify? So kind of like almost all our decisions are actually emotional.
100%, because you start going down rabbit holes, right? So you start going down a route, and then confirmation bias or a whole range of biases.
Explain confirmation bias.
So confirmation bias is just, let me just think how to explain that clearly. Confirmation bias, if I stand to be corrected, but I think confirmation bias, the best way to explain that is that you've now gone down this route. You are certain that this is the correct route. And then you try to convince yourself, in other words, you create confirmation that this is the best route that you've gone down. And you start looking for cues to confirm that you've gone down the right rabbit hole. It's like when we read a piece of literature. So it's like when we read a complex piece of literature. Let's say we read something like Moby Dick. It's an interesting book. I like Moby Dick. It's a really interesting book. So Moby Dick is a really complex piece of literature because it not only does it communicate certain social truths, there's certain satirical truths that's being communicated in the book about how society is being judged during this time period that Moby Dick, happens. But you can also read it as a comedy. It's a really, really funny book. So the reason I use that as an example is it's all got to do with context and what you look for. If there isn't someone that's telling you, well, this character is being portrayed like this in a specific light, and you need to understand the historical context to understand why that is significant. If there's no one pointing that out for you when you make decisions, you're going to make emotional decisions, and you're going to look for things to confirm your decisions. In other words, because this has happened, I've made the right decision. Yeah. So I think that's a simple way of explaining it.
Confirmation bias is a fascinating field for me. The idea that once we have a decision locked in, especially if it's emotional, it's as if we scan the environment for things that confirm that is the right decision, or
100%.
That is the thing to fear, even fear. We scan the
100%.
environment, see that's why you should fear that, or that's why you should be careful for regarding that. So you also said, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just also, what is interesting is that I think part of my job, just like your job, is we have to read a lot. So we have to assimilate a lot of information. And what I find is a lot of the time, there's a lot of thought leaders that tell us, things like don't be afraid, be bold, be confident. So not only are we trying to find confirmation bias in the decisions that we've made, we're also subconsciously reinforced by certain powerful voices or influential voices that's telling us, well, don't doubt yourself. Go down this road, stick with your decisions, almost like even if it is a bad one.
Even if it's a bad one, stick to it. Gotcha.
Yeah, just stick to it. Just be brave. Just follow what you're doing. Yeah, just be confident. So all of that stuff plays together to make decision making quite complex.
You said the brain it wants to create context, because if it's got context, it can, it enables it to make a decision. Okay. Even if the context that it's creating is like confirmation bias or looking to the past or comparing apples and pears or oranges or stones, sometimes just to get context. Can you say a bit about that?
So context is an interesting thing. So your brain has been hardwired to just make decisions within context. In other words, if I choose between A, B, and C, your brain would like you to understand the value or the significant difference between A, B, and C, or what value am I sacrificing in choosing between A, B, and C. So Dan Ariely, in his book Predictably Irrational, he tells a story about it's something to the effect of there's a newspaper and they want to increase the amount of subscriptions they get to the newspaper, and they've got a newspaper offering and there is an online offering.
Yeah.
So in other words, you can buy the newspaper physically, or you can read it online, or you can do both. So they started doing experiments, and they to see which option and at which price would people buy. So then let's say they sold a newspaper at $50 or I think pounds a month, something like that. And then they created a second combination, and that is you could read it online for, let's say, $100. And then they created a third option, and the third option was something to the effect of, you could read it online, and you can get a physical newspaper also for $100 or £100. And then what they found through the research is that everybody, or the majority of people, started choosing the option where they could get both. And the reason for that is people understood what they were getting.
They could compare.
They could compare. So your brain likes clarity and complex. And all that stuff is obviously ancient, right? That comes from, a time long ago when there was a far more dangers in the world, and the world was far more dangerous. So your brain's adapted to this, fight or flight. I really need to be certain mechanism that lives in your brain. So it's all connected with that at the end of the day.
What I was also curious about that you mentioned is how do you stress test ideas? I mean, maybe you can talk about two areas within a company. I can kind of see how you can do that for a company, but in life, how do you stress test your decisions or your ideas or your strategies in life?
Well, I mean, it's actually not, I don't think it'll be dissimilar. And it comes back to decision making, right? Some of the same principles that you can use in making good or quality, or they call quality decisions. It's not about making a good decision. It's about making a quality decision.
What's a quality decision?
So a quality decision is making the best possible decision with what you know right now.
Okay, based on
it's about going through a process. I mean, there's a good book that was written called Quality Decision Making, and I mean it's a book that tells you exactly the principles of what a good quality or what a quality decision is. So there's a lot of process and principles, but let me create a little bit of structure around that conversation. So. And I can take it back to companies. Like one of the things that I always tell companies when you do their decisions, when I need to make decisions for them or when I need to stress test or something, I always start with helping them understand and understanding myself. But what is the prevalent belief system in the organization or the company? All of us has got a belief system. And the mistake that we make is we don't spend enough time thinking about what is our belief system, and we don't spend enough time writing it down. So it's almost like it's that Stephen Covey book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I mean, it's almost like it almost starts there. If you can understand what you believe, and you can understand why you believe that, and what your principles are, and purpose and identity, then things like stress testing ideas and making decisions becomes far easier, because you've got a baseline. You've created your own personal context to do that. And that's a starting point for whether you're stress testing an idea or making a decision. That's the critical thing.
And so that it means it's based on your beliefs, and you've also tested that. You figure that out as you've gone along in life. So 100%. It's based on those beliefs, and you are aware of those beliefs. You know why you believe those things, not based on experience from the past alone.
100%. Because it needs to be, like Carl Jung calls it individuation. So the process that you go through to become an individual. Yeah. I think a lot of people will probably disagree with me, but I think you see the same things in companies. Companies individuate as well. They come into their own in regards to who they are, or the purpose that they want to attain, or they want to realize in the world, or the vision they want to realize in the world. I think there's strong commonality there, but it does start with that. Understand your belief system. That's where it all starts. Not a lot of, because people get stuck with vision and values and mission. And those things are very rudimentary. They're good to have, but that's not what a belief system is. A belief system is a little bit deeper. A belief system starts with, who am I? Or who do I need to be? Or who do I want to be in the future? And obviously that's an iterative process that you have to go through to understand that, right? But that's the core of any kind of belief system. You can go back thousands of years. You can go to the Spartans, the Romans, Genghis Khan, Mongol tribes. You can go through to the samurai. You can go through to medieval knights, the Ottoman Empire. Any one of those big societal groups or subgroups started with identity. This is who we are. This is why we are here. This is what we want to achieve. This is where we want to go. So that's quite a complex discussion, because there's a lot in it. But that's where it starts, right? That's where it starts. So there's something that always sticks to me. So I'm quite a bit of a history nut. So I probably read way too much, and I'm supposed to. And I remember, I'm the best person to invite to a cocktail party, because I can talk for hours about useless facts that no one really cares about. But it makes me very interesting at cocktail parties. That's about it. So I'll give you an example of identity, because what we do is we create. So we spoke about context, and we spoke about confirmation bias. So, we all create identity markers, or what we should do is we should create identity markers. So if you're a company, you create a logo. But as human beings, this is very Jungian psychology, but we should create our own symbols to communicate who we are based on our understanding of where we are and where we're going, right? So if you look at the Romans, there's a very famous, I probably won't be able to pronounce the Italian name, and I'm not even going to try, but there's a very famous statue of a wolf mother, a female wolf. And then there are 2 young boys suckling on her. And that's Remus and Romulus. Those are the founding fathers of Rome. So remember, in a society like that, in a society, in an ancient society like that, if you knew that the guys I am supposed to fight now, in other words, the Romans, their forefathers come from wolves. They associate themselves with wolves. That's a terrifying symbol. So all of that stuff works together to create a tapestry of who you are. So if you can stress testing your ideas and sense checking your ideas and making good decisions becomes a lot easier, not infinitely, but it becomes a lot easier if you understand who I am and what I believe. And those are called the unchanging principles that guide you through life, because then you've got context to make the decision in. Then it's about understanding, okay, what are the things I don't know? What have I not thought of? What am I worried about? Have I done my homework? Am I logical in making my decision or stress testing this idea? So the core piece is who I am and what I believe, and then the other parts is a process that you just go through, and that's ritual, right? So you can, and then there are multiple decision-making techniques ranging from complex to simple, but it's a process that you have to go through.
But say more about identity markers or belief markers.
Okay.
What does that look like, for an individual? So I'm assuming for a company, it's a logo, it's the brand, the things they associate with. What does that look like for an individual?
So there's a few ways to look at this. I can only tell you how I look at it. A lot of people will have their own opinion. So for me, identity is far more than your logo or the brand. So what I use is there are two ladies that wrote a book in the early 2000s called Margaret Mark and Carol S. Pearson. It's called the Hero and the Ruler. I think that's the name. And it's got to do with archetypal identities or Jungian identities. So there are 12 Jungian identities. So it's not like the zodiac. Those are star signs. This is identity. You aren't an Aries. Okay, so I'm an Aries because I was born in it. That's confirmation bias. Okay,
that's a good example.
Yeah. So Jungian identities, obviously, so it comes from the fact that we've been telling stories to each other for literally centuries, right? Centuries and centuries. We've been telling stories as a way to communicate truth, to make sense of the world, right? Mm-hmm. So as part of that storytelling process, certain identities come from those stories. If you analyze the old mythology, whether it be Norse mythology or Greek mythology, obviously the clever people and Carl Jung and those guys, they started analyzing those stories, and from those stories you get certain identity types or archetypes. So they analyzed these stories, and from that they could pull these set identities or archetypes, identity types, right? So that's, for me, is where identity starts. You need to start as deep as that. So there are 12 archetypes, and various people have got various definitions of them. But an example of an archetype would be a challenger, or a warrior, or a champion, or an explorer, or a sage, or an everyman, or a leader, or a ruler. Those are types. All of them are common, but that's what they're about, right? So identity starts there. It starts on that level. It's, who do I believe I am, who I need to be? Am I a warrior? Am I a champion? Am I a crusader? Which is all about, I want to help other people have impact in the world. Or am I an explorer or a sage? In other words, I'm either using discovery, or I'm using my knowledge and expertise to guide people on a better path. So it sounds very ethereal, but that for me is identity. It's that belief that right at my core, who am I? And as you would know, because of what you do, your core identity of who you are, a lot hangs from that. Your rituals, good rituals hangs from who you are. Good habits hangs from who you are. And in a modern world, the new thing that everybody's talking about is personal brand building. We all need to become brands at the end of the day. And I buy into that quite a bit. I buy into that a little bit. I think it's quite important to do your own personal brand building in the social media world that we live in. But the point is, identity starts there. It starts with a core belief, who I am, not just who I am, André. That's your logo, that's your brand name, for lack of a better word. But identity starts with understanding who is André. And obviously that's a process that you have to go through. It's not, you don't wake up one morning and say to yourself, I am a warrior. You might be, but you have to test that a little bit and see what that is and how it all hangs together.
What you're saying, André, about who do I believe I am?
Yes.
Because what I'm gathering from that is, if you believe you are a certain archetype of certain kind of person, that gets stress tested by life.
Yes, 100%.
So you look at your results in your life,
Yeah.
the things you accomplish. You look at your rituals, your habits. And I want you to maybe say something about the difference between rituals and habits in a moment.
Yeah.
But I mean, all of those things get stress tested by life.
Yeah.
And if you get that feedback, I'm guessing that's where you make the adjustment.
100%.
Maybe this is not really who I am. So
Yeah.
who am I? Or who do I need to become for me to have what I want, to be able to go for the things I dream of?
100%.
And that also gets stress tested, right? That dream, that ideal,
Exactly.
that vision.
Exactly. I mean, if you think about, and what is interesting to me is I spend a lot of time with big organizations, medium-sized, small organizations, talking exactly about this. Or who are we? What are we about? How are we going to communicate this? How does this belief, who we are and our purpose, translate into an idea or a product or a service? But what I find interesting then is, as people, I don't think as people we spend enough time doing this. In other words, interrogating who we are, what we're about. So I mean, like, it's probably got to do with what I do for a living, but I probably drive my wife up the wall, but I'm consistently busy with this process and stress testing that. But the thing is, I don't think everybody's busy with that. But if you want to better yourself, you need to be busy with that all of the time as a human being. And you're 100% right. It's, at the end of the day, it's strategy, right? We all have a strategy. We all need to have a strategy about our life. He's not the nicest guy, right? Not by any, he's a bit of a tyrant, depending on who you speak to. But I always look at Genghis Khan as a historical figure. He had, you can see it today. When you read the literature, there's an incredible book called The Secret History of the Mongols. It's a fascinating piece of literature. It's hard to get your hands on it, but if you can, if you're interested in that stuff, it's really fascinating, where they tell the story of Genghis Khan. His real name is Temujin, and how he had a strategy to conquer the world, and how he realized, who do I need to be to conquer the world? And how do I need to get my people to unite as one in order to conquer the world? Because when he took over, when he became the Khan, the great Khan, the Mongols they were a whole bunch of nomadic tribes constantly fighting each other. So he had to unite them. So together we are stronger. And then he went about and he wrote a constitution, a law book called the Yasa, that said, from now on, we will all behave like this. So there's strategy in life. And there's another guy he's a hero. He's incredible. His name is Miyamoto Musashi. He's a samurai. He's considered to be the greatest samurai of all time, right? And you can see it in his life. He's a swordsman. He's a samurai, or a ronin, a masterless samurai, but incredible swordsman. And he's got a book called The Book of Five Rings. And when you read that book, he doesn't refer to himself as a samurai. He refers to himself as a strategist. And so everything he do is strategic. So our life is strategic. Specifically in this world we live in right now, where I have to think about young people and the opportunities and options they have to do incredible things, the platforms. It's like, when I went to university, my options were teacher, doctor, dominie, engineer. I ended up not doing any of those things, or an accountant or a lawyer or something like that. Whereas now the field's open. So because there's more options, spend more time understanding who I am, what I want to do in life, and develop your strategy for that. And remember the big strategic questions. There are 5. Well, some people disagree with me,
Before
but
you go into those questions, André, I want to know them. So make a note of that.
Yeah.
I want to comment on what you just said about the options for young people these days. It's massive in terms of what they can do with their life for the rest of their life, kind of thinking. And I don't know if you know Barry Swartz's book, The Paradox of Choice.
No.
Well, basically, it comes down to, we think more options, will be better, help us to make better decisions, but actually it paralyzes us because of
100%.
Context, like you mentioned. Because you can compare 3 things to one another and make a decision. But if you compare 20 or 100, or 300 things to one another, then that sense of loss when you choose one option becomes very big, because if you choose one out of three, you lose the other two, but you can compare them. But now 100%. If you choose one, you lose out on 200 others. So that makes a lot of sense to me in terms of why we should then focus more on ourselves, our belief systems, who am I, to guide us and help us make those kind of decisions.
Okay, so the thing is, the paradox in that is coming up with options is not necessarily a bad thing. Because I think it's not a counter. It's just we get stuck in life when we've got too much options. And ironically enough, we get stuck in life if we don't have any options. So because if we've got no options, that breeds fear, right? And the more fear there is, the less we do, we just get stuck. So the way to get out of fear, you have to create more options. If you create more creative options, you've got options to play, right? There's a great South African strategist called Nicola Tyler. That's her thinking. So I really have to give her credit for that. But that's her thinking. She says, don't go into the cycle of fear. Go to the cycle of hope. And the way that you create hope is come up with more options. This is a brilliant strategic thinker. So, but now the problem is now you've ended up, like you said, with too many options. And now because you haven't put in the hard work to understand this is who I am, this is what I am about, because you haven't done that work, I'm stuck. How do I make this decision? How do I understand the opportunity cost? That's difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And when students, I work with a lot of students, when they don't know who they are, they don't know what, they don't even have something to believe, who they want to be. Exactly. That I believe I want to be. They look at the options and they just think about the possible outcome.
100%.
If I choose this path, I will be rich or successful, or I will 100%. Be able to help people in this or that way.
Yeah.
Without aligning it with who they are, because they don't know, they haven't done that work, and it's hard work to do, as you would probably know, saying you focus on that a lot.
So it is hard work, I think, in terms of what you're saying, because I think it's a societal thing. I think as societies globally, we say to our children, when we speak about who are you, the discussion isn't really, but who are you? Who do you want? Who are you really? And how are you going to develop that? It is go do something to become a lawyer or a doctor or a strategist or whatever.
That'll be who you are.
That's who you are, but that's not who you are. I might be a sage that is a strategist, but in the same way, I can be a sage that's a cricketer or a sportsman or a rocket designer these days. Or
I like the fact that you differentiate between a sportsman and a cricketer, because in my mind, they're not the same thing. I'm not a cricket fan.
I played way too much cricket. Whenever I think of cricket, I think of standing on a cricket pitch 3:15 on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon, and there's 50 overs to go. So I've got post-traumatic stress when I think about cricket.
Exactly. Okay. Now, you said there's 5 strategies or 5 ways to develop.
There's 5 questions. So if you think about, so if you think about any kind of the basic strategic questions that you need to ask yourself are the following, right? It is, number 1, what's your strategic ambition? And to make that real for people, your strategic ambition is pretty much your identity and your purpose. That's your belief system. I believe this is who I am. In order to live who I am and to live my purpose, I need to achieve. I need to do. I want to achieve. I want to succeed in the following ways. That's strategic ambition. The funny thing is, the clearer that is, the more effective you're going to do. I think a lot of people get stuck in not implementing or developing strategy because they're not clear on who am I, what's my purpose, where am I going. So the strategic ambition bit is critical. Then the second strategic question is, where am I going to play? In order to achieve my strategic ambition, where am I going to play? So in other words, where will I compete? If it's a competitive environment that you want to go into, where do I want to play? What's my sandbox? If you can have that, if you can define that, then you can say, okay, I know what my ambition is. I know where I'm going to play. And then the third question is, how am I going to compete and win? In other words, how am I going to play and win? What's my big idea? What's my thing? How am I going to win in the sandbox where I'm going to compete? And that goes for business and in life. And if you can figure that out, then you can say, well, okay, if this is my ambition, this is where I'm going to play, and this is how I'm going to play and win, what do I need to put in place in order to achieve that? What are the things? What are the strategic term is capabilities? What are the capabilities that I'm going to, in a human terms, it's skill sets, strengths, expertise, all of those things that I need to put in place. And then if you're a business, the conversation then goes to what's my value proposition, or what's my brand going to be? What's my message going to be? That's the next set. And that's sort of like some people put it together with how am I going to compete and win? I use it as a separate discussion. And then the final thing is systems and procedures. Like what systems and procedures and protocols do I need to follow in order to implement the strategy? Those are the 5 or 6 strategic discussions that you need to have with yourself.
Could you go through them again?
Yeah. So the first one is strategic ambition. So strategic ambition is purpose, identity. Who am I? What do I want to achieve in life or in business? That's the first one. And like I said, it gets execution of strategy gets easier, and the development of strategy gets far easier when you're clear on what your strategic ambition is and what I want to achieve. I think we live in a world where we consistently say, or at least my world, well, simplify. Let's simplify. Let's turn it into that 3 sexy words. Okay, that's fine if you want to come up with a great payoff line for your brand. It's not fine if you want to define your vision. Okay. Or if you want to define your purpose. Make it clear so that you can understand it. And the stress test for that is always, can you explain it in one sentence? If you can explain something, you can understand it. So that's the first thing. So the second question then is, where am I going to play? Or where am I going to compete? What is the sandbox where I want to play in? What borders am I going to play? And you can think about, like I think everything is about value. My philosophy about strategy or business is value creation. So it's almost like, where do I want to go and create value? Do I want to become a doctor, or do I want to be the best possible business leader, or whatever the case may be? That's where you play. And it's about understanding the opportunities then where you can play so that you can achieve your strategic ambition. That's the second.
Still aligned with that identity.
But it needs to be. It's always aligned to that. So it's almost like the narrative that you need to go through is, this is who I am. This is why I do what I do, or what I want to do. This is how I'm going to live who I am, so that I can achieve the following dream. And to do that, I want to do the following things. That's strategic ambition type of narratives. And then it is, in order to achieve that strategic ambition, where do I need to play? Where do I need to compete? And that's understanding the sandbox. So for me to achieve my ambition, to me, in order to do the thing that makes me tick, I need to go into the medical field, or I need to play in the wellness space, or the enablement space, or the empowerment space, or the sports field. It doesn't matter. It's just about understanding. If you can, that's why that first identity discussion is so important, because if you can understand that, where I play becomes infinitely easier to understand. So if you've done that, then the third strategic discussion is to say, how am I going to play and win? Because strategy is about winning, right? Life is about winning. It doesn't mean it's winning at the expense of someone else. That's business more often than not, and that's sports. But in life, it's not at cost. It shouldn't be at the cost of someone else. It's how will I compete and how will I win? In other words, how will I achieve my purpose, my identity, my goals, and stuff like this in the sandbox that I've set out for myself. And then the next discussion then is to say, well, what are the capabilities? What are the things that I need in order to win? And in business, it's called capabilities or strengths. But for human beings or people, it is, what are my personal strengths that I need to develop? What are my skill sets or expertise or knowledge gaps that I need to fill? What do I need to learn? How do I need to do? Habits and rituals would fall in there. And then from a business discussion then goes into, if you understand the capabilities and all of that stuff, then the business discussion goes into, what is my value proposition going to be? In other words, what is this product or service that I'm going to give people? What should my brand look like? Well, how am I going to communicate? How am I going to sell this? But in a personal, for people, that then comes to what value, how can I translate my personal purpose into something that's going to impact the world? What's that thing that I'm going to do that's going to make a difference in people's lives? What is that tangible things that I want to do so that I can become valuable citizens, so that I can impact people's lives, so that I can live my purpose, right? And then the final one is then systems and procedures. And I guess habits and rituals and ways of doing can fit in there as well. But in business sense, your systems and procedures are the protocols that you follow in order to execute and implement strategy. And it's the same for human beings. If we don't set out rituals and ways of working, and if we're not disciplined in following those things, we're never going to implement strategy. Strategy gets lost on implementation. It's, if you don't execute, you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't execute it, you're never going to learn. You're never going to stress test. You're never going to fight the battles that's going to build your confidence as a human being or a business leader, whoever you're going to be.
Does that just like even mean that you can go through all of that, identity, why I want, how I want to do it, all of that, and then still not implement? Or will the fact that you go through all the others, generate the will to implement or the motivation to implement, or not necessarily?
I think that's a personal question. I think some people get stuck in the process. That's one thing about me. It's because of my personality. I get stuck in the cycle. I get stuck because I really like thinking about things. Mm-hmm. I get stuck in thinking. So I have learned through time and time again, I need to be hard on myself, and I need to build in as many processes and protocols to help me implement and execute. Because implementation and execution is scary, right? That's where it turns into reality. Yeah. So that's where the systems and procedures, and that's why that is so important that you write that down for yourself, to say that this is how I execute strategy. And part of that is also to figure out what works for you. Like over the years, I have figured out what works for me. Like I know that I find it hard to start implementing something if I haven't drawn out a mind map, for argument's sake. Because a mind map is how my brain thinks, I think. So I know if I'm stuck, I draw a mind map of what I need to do or what I want to achieve, how it fits. And then all of a sudden I go over to action. So basically, I think my triggers are if I'm clear and if I'm confident that I know enough. Now, that's very specific to me. My brain likes the idea that I know enough. Like I can handle a lot of complexity and uncertainty, but I need to be certain that I know enough to move forward. So I think people get stuck, or people go through something and there's a failure because things happen. You can't plan for everything in life, right? You can plan for, things going wrong and stuff, but you can't plan for everything. Yeah. Things go wrong, people lose confidence, and they don't start implementing. And then they go back to thinking and worrying and, is my strategic ambition right? But you have to go through a few cycles. It is an iterative and a systemic process at the end of the day.
Can you say something about the rituals and habits now and how they might be different?
Yeah. So how I think about rituals and habits is the ritual is the thing that I do to form a habit.
Okay.
So that's how I look at it. I look at it as and there'll be probably a lot of other definitions, but I think a ritual is the little mental model or little cycle that I go through to implement a healthy habit. And habits for me is something that I automatically do. Now, the interesting thing is, I believe that a habit is not just not biting your fingernails. I think a habit is also how we think about ourselves.
Absolutely.
So how you speak. That's why language, the words that I use is so important. And then it all brings back to identity, why identity is so important. If I'm a sage, if I'm an expert, if I'm a guru, then I need to speak like a guru. Because if I speak like a guru, I start projecting that image of, well, this is what I am. I am an expert, right? And that then means I can reinforce that habit that I am an expert.
And you also, I
think a lot of people get caught up there with that.
I like the idea that you project that, but you also kind of digest that.
Yes.
If you act that way. and internalize it. You know, one of the things I often tell people when I ask them, why don't you have what you want? I tell them, don't give me BS, meaning no blaming other people or circumstances, but also no shaming yourself. You know, I am weak, I'm lazy, you know, I am a procrastinator, things like that. Instead, I go to turn it around and give me SB, meaning systems, which is about rituals and structure and things that help you create habits, help you create the kind of things that you actually want to do. And secondly, beliefs, which is where you started, the identity part of it. If that makes sense.
100%. And also remember, it's also got to do with strategy. More often than not, it's cyclical is the wrong word, but it is systemic, which means it's a system. Our lives are a system. It's a complex idea, but we're systems consistently engaging with systems. And if you start thinking about yourself as a system, you understand that it's something that needs to consistently better itself. Like there's a guy called Nicholas Lerman. And Nicholas Lerman I think he's a sociologist, if I'm not, I stand to be corrected, but I think he's a sociologist. And he developed something called, or he appropriated an idea called autopoiesis. And autopoiesis it's basically, I need to tell the whole story for it to make sense. So there were these two guys that they looked for an alternative definition of what is life, how do we define life? And then they came up with this idea of autopoiesis and replication and blah, blah. But it was from a biological point of view. Now, from a biological point of view, that way of thinking never got any traction. It didn't make sense. But then Nicholas Lerman read about it. And he said, this is an interesting idea to take to systems thinking, specifically social systems. So autopoiesis is where you have a social system. In other words, a group of people together, or a tribe, or a group, or an individual. And in order for that social system to continue to exist, its core idea needs to be replicated and continuously be replicated. For me, that's value. That's what purpose is about. It's about, I need to consistently replicate and refine and evolve and improve the idea that I stand for, who I am. And that to me is very relevant to strategy. Strategy is not a thing that starts and stops. It's a continuous thing. I need to consistently check out for what's happening. And I consistently need to get feedback. Like, I've done this thing. What is the feedback? So I've implemented this strategy. I have now started a YouTube channel while we're on this. And I'm putting out this type of content. How is it being received? What are people saying about it? And that takes a lot of bravery, right? Because you have to be open for people to criticize you. So, like, for a long time in my life, when I was younger, criticism was a real problem for me. So today I understand, because of my identity and my personality, and I've done that work, that's just a trigger. It's got to do with how I grew up. So it's just a trigger. So I need to just tell myself, when anybody criticizes me, it's okay. It's just feedback. It's not criticism. I take it as feedback. It's just feedback. It's just telling me I need to change my system. I need to change my point of view. I need to adapt slightly. And I need to take it to heart and say, well, I know who I am, but I'm getting this feedback, which means I'm either not expressing who I am clearly enough or simply enough, or the things that I'm doing isn't reflecting who I am as an individual. So, simply put, if I'm an expert and I give someone a piece of work, but it's filled with spelling mistakes, I can't be an expert, right? So, and I say that because I struggle with spelling. I'm a little bit dyslexic type of thing. So I really struggle with spelling. So it's hard work for me, but yeah.
Makes sense. I like the thing you said about systems interacting with systems.
Yes.
Because different systems will have a different effect on your system.
100%.
Think about people or organizations or circumstances. It's all about the system. And I also like when you say your strategy is systemic, it's not a model in terms of model being static. It's a model, and it just kind of plows through life, even though many people live with a mental model that's instead of a strategic system that can adapt. And also, I like the idea that when when you are interacting with other systems and you get that feedback on what this interaction is generating, you probably also have the option to say, okay, these two systems won't gel. They won't work together. Because one part is, where do I need to grow or adapt? The other part is maybe the other system needs to adapt. Or they're just not compatible, or these differences are okay. We can coexist and even work together on certain things without completely adapting the other system's mindset, belief system, priorities, whatever.
I think that's why, again, that's why that identity and purpose piece and belief system piece is so important, right? Because if you've got that clear, then it's far simpler to understand what the other system's belief system is. And is there resonance and rapport between the two systems? Do we believe the same things? Do we do the same things? We don't have to have the same identity, but at least we can have the same principles, ways of working. And then the other thing is also like I mentioned, I'm big on value. For me, it's a very simple idea. It's just, I believe we're here to have impact on other people's lives. So my thing is, I'm a giver by nature. So for me, it's just about, I really want to have impact in people's lives and see a difference. But then I start looking for that cues. I start looking for that feedback. If I'm engaging with another system and there's no impact, or there is an exploitation of it, then I'm going to say, well, I'm no longer going to have the ability to have impact in this person's life or the system's life. So I'm either going to withdraw and see what the feedback is, or I'm going to try harder and see what the feedback is. But at some stage, you need to realize that I'm putting a lot of value in here, and it's not just about getting it back. That giving is about giving it away, right? But you see, the giving away has got no impact. You can rather take that value that you give and apply it to another system, because the feedback will be better.
Makes sense. Makes
but
sense.
That's why
it's finite. What you have, what you have to give is finite.
100%.
Okay.
100%.
Can you try and dumb it down for us, André, in terms of, if you give advice to young people and you tell them, here are the 3 principles in terms of decision making. You make it very simple. If you remember these 3 things, you'll make, a 50%, you'll get a 50% improvement on the kind of decisions you make. Now you're supposed to go, challenge accepted.
No, I'm thinking. I'm going into thinker mode now.
Okay.
If I could simplify it down, if I can simplify it down, I think decision making becomes easier. If I had to use 3 things, the 3 things would be clear about who you are and what you want.
Okay.
I think that's thing number 1. Just be clear on that and consistently work on that.
Okay.
The second thing is take a breather. When you need to make a tough decision, just take a breather, right? Just sit back. You don't have to make that now, but just go make a cup of coffee and think about it.
On that, sorry to interrupt you before you mention your third one, I think it's in the book, Getting Things Done. But he talks about decision making. And when someone brings him a decision, it's like, I can't remember the author's name now. Dan Goleman, I want to say, but I don't think it's him. But anyway, ask how much time you have to make this decision. Ask how much time you have. That helps you to not feel the stress of, I have to make this decision immediately. And just give yourself that breather, that time. So I like that one.
So just take the fear away, because a lot of time there's a lot of uncertainty. The scary thing is sometimes you're not even aware of the uncertainty or the fear or the pressure that you might be feeling. But just when you make a critical decision, just take a breather. You can think about it. I mean, you're not, something that you said previously about, it's an adaptive system that can evolve and stuff like that. I mean, I always like to say, you're not a tank. Okay, you're not a tank. Tanks just run through things. You're not a tank. I mean, you're a human being, right? So you have time to think about it and reflect and stuff like that. Okay. So that would be my second thing.
Okay.
My third thing would be to say, Do you have a process, or get a process for making a decision? That's a very simple thing. Get a process.
Like your mind mapping thing.
Like your mind mapping thing. But get one that works for you. Like Jeff Bezos has got this thing. He says you get two types of decisions. You get one decision is things that if you make this decision, you can't change it. This is a heavy decision. You go down this rabbit hole. This is it. You're no longer in Kansas, Dorothy. You're in Wonderland, right? The second type of decision is then things that you can change. So that's an idea of process. Understand, get a process that works for you, and understand those things, because if you can do that, you can make better decisions. So be clear about who you are and what you want. Take a breather. Always take a rain check. Understand, create space for yourself to really think about it. And the third thing is get a process to follow to make that decision. Whether it's pros and cons or whatever it is, to a complex mathematical formula, just get something that works for you.
Awesome. We've talked about a few books already, but maybe what are two books you'd recommend for people, business owners, or individuals who want to learn about decision making or strategy or things like that?
I'll tell you right now. Let me just pick up my Kindle here. It's so nifty to do these things on a computer.
Yeah.
But there's one book when it comes to decision making. There's a few, and some of them are very complicated. But I find where is it? Here we go. So it's a very simple book. The book is called Decision Quality: Value Creation from Better Business Decisions, and it's written by Carl Spetzler, Hannah Winter, and Jennifer Meyer.
All right.
So Decision Quality. It's a nice, simple, practical, effective book that you can apply not only to life, but that you can apply to your business as well. It's a very good book.
Thank you. Great. Okay. Last question.
Yeah.
Or do you have another book, or you want to stick with that one?
I'll stick with, when it comes to decision making, I'll stick to that one. The other ones are quite, gets very technical and stuff like that. That's a very practical, very easy to use book when it comes to decision making. Yeah.
You've touched on my last question already, but maybe you can put it into different words or clarify it a bit more. What do you feel is your superpower?
My superpower?
Yeah.
So my superpower, I figured out, is that I don't have a problem with complexity. So I can read lots of information, and I'm not a brainiac, but I can retain large portions of that information. So I can read 10 books and I can understand those books, and I can retain the information, and then I can put them together into a new bucket of knowledge. To you, if you're going to solve this problem, we can think about it like this because of this, what this guy said, about it like this because of what this guy said, and we can bring that together. So now we've got a better lattice work of knowledge and actionable intelligence to help us make this decision or develop this strategy. That's my superpower. It's integrating knowledge, integrating broad spectrum knowledge and repurposing and repackaging it into a tool that you can use to make a difference in your life or your business.
Very cool.
And that would be my superpower. Okay. Like my thing is, so I've got my personal aspiration is I really want to be a polymath. I'm a far way off from that. So I'm an aspirational polymath, and a polymath is someone that's got broad spectrum expertise in a whole bunch of topics. So that's sort of like my goal, because there's something attached to that. There's a lot of work being done in polymathy, and so the ultimate goal of a polymath is to have what they call big C impact. And big C impact is to develop an idea and thinking that is not just new, but that's got big, large-scale societal impact. So it really changes how we think and how we do. So that's sort of like my big thing, yeah.
Yeah, and you're on your way there because you're already a great cocktail guest. I'm thinking that's
100%. I just need to get it up from cocktails to next. Will probably be
next will be Bry. Great Bry. then up.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Now, Andre, where can people reach you when companies or individuals want to work with you? How can they get hold of you?
Well, I think the simplest way or the best way is always just an email. So I've got 2 email addresses. The one is andre@redteamintel.com. And the second one is far simpler. It's just andre@andreleroux.co.za.
Okay,
awesome. That's the best way to get hold of me. Yeah.
And you said that's why you chose your company name, the Red Team thing. Just, I mean, we're actually done, but I want just say a few things about that.
So, actually, I've had quite a few businesses in my life, consulting businesses specifically. And years ago, I had a business, and the business was doing very, very well, but it was very focused. It wasn't niche. It was just very focused in regards to what it did. So I sort of like went through a bit of soul searching, and I said to myself, just like, there needs to be a better way of helping businesses. You can't be so focused on this one discipline. Doing this one discipline is not going to save a business. And it was purely around brand building. It was brand strategy, everything else. And I realized that just like I'm not going to save businesses purely by redoing their brand. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that I do for people and whatever. And then I read about something that happened in Israel. And it's a very interesting story. So I read this story. So in 1967 was the 6-day war between Israel and the nations around them. And pretty much the Israelis, they attacked everyone. I mean, they wiped out the Egyptian Air Force, I think, before 10 o'clock in the morning on day 1. So the Egyptians had no Air Force. It was just incredible. So it was this incredible victory for the Israelis. And then the Israelis, they came together, the Knesset or whoever, the thinkers there, and they said, let's package the success recipe that we have. And let's call it, I think they call it the concept or something like that. And they said, as long as the concept is in place, no one will ever attack us again. Everyone will be too scared. And then fast forward to 1973. I think it's either in May or October, and it's in Yom Kippur. It was the Yom Kippur War. So, and here's the thing, right? So they get attacked on the eve of Yom Kippur, the holiday, and they were nearly decimated. And just through sheer grit and determination, they fight back, and they lose quite a lot of land. I think they lost the Sinai Desert and stuff like that. My memory is my history is a bit hazy during these things. But anyway, so long story short, the Americans helped them, but the Israelis survived. But they nearly get wiped out. They come close to the brink. And then when the dust settled, they came together again, and they looked at each other and they said, "Hang on, the concept is still valid. So the concept's still in place, and we had double agents and spies telling us that the attack would happen, and we didn't listen." So they went into a self-reflection period, and they said to themselves, we need to stop this from ever happening again. So what they then did is, on their leadership council, one guy was appointed, and his job on that council was to do the following. Whenever everybody was in agreement, he had to attack the idea. So when everybody agrees, his job is to attack the idea and to disagree with everyone, and to drive a dialogue to say why it is a bad idea, so that they could stress test their thinking in the future, so that this will never happen again. And then that became red teaming. Okay. So red teaming is when you have someone, an outside person, objectively stress testing and sense checking the thinking and ideas of a company. And there's a whole methodology and process that you go through to do that. And then after the 9/11 event, where the Trade Towers was attacked, that kind of thinking was adopted by all the world's militaries and leadership companies and stuff like that. Specifically now in a period like this, because it helps you plan for unintended, or unseen eventualities or things that are happening and stuff like that. And it's quite interesting, and it's quite interesting to just talk about it a little bit because it ties back to the other stuff we spoke about. And that is, red teaming is about, the first thing is, obviously you've got your idea, you've got your strategy, but the first part of that process is then to understand the thinking that led to this idea being formulated. So how did we get here? So you don't stress test the idea, you're not critical about the idea, you're critical about the knowledge and the thinking and the processes that led you here. And there's various methodologies and processes that you can use. And then what you do is you take that knowledge and learning and insight about the thinking that got you here to develop alternative ideas, creative, doable alternatives that you just come up with them. And then you say, okay, we've got two bodies of knowledge here. We've got a new narrative around a possible solution, and we've got background information that we can use. And then you use that to aggressively attack and stress test your original idea. And then you'll see one of three things. One, your idea is actually good, or your idea is good, but we can improve it like this. Or three, it's actually a terrible idea. It's not a good idea, but here is a better idea. And that's red teaming. And that's something that I do quite a lot of. And that's another way of making a better decision in your organization. So yeah, that's what red teaming is about.
Awesome. Awesome. André, once again, thank you so much for joining us on Fresh Perspective. And folks, remember, if you change your perspective, if you change your mind, you can transform your life. Thanks, André. Until next time.
Thank you. Cheers.